Hi everyone, it's half term. Hope your revision's going well. This is the second and final video for GCSE Economics, and that is the third paper, the paper with the pre-release material, which I am currently looking at the moment. Those of you who've been following this, you'll know that in my previous video we got up to figure 6, and I'm going to run through from figure 7 through to the end of this pre-release material. So let's get cracking on this. Figure 7 presents us with a table of information about 4 countries: Bangladesh, Benin, India and the United Kingdom. I think the first thing that you need to be aware of is that the exam board, they'll often try and just trick you a little bit, try and catch you out by presenting you with data in various forms. So it's important that you know the difference between thousands, millions, billions, trillions, etc. I hope this isn't an insult to your intelligence, but it is often something which candidates get wrong in the exam. So we've got Bangladesh here, 152 million, absolutely fine. Then look at India, so it's 1,300 million. So of course that is 1.3 billion. And just be aware of that in case you are asked any very basic and simple questions about which country has the biggest population or something like that. Right, life expectancy. I think the obvious thing to point out here is obviously that the UK, the developed economy here in this table, has a much greater life expectancy than Benin, which is the worst. So if you're a woman there, only expect to live to 59, and if you're a man, even worse, 55. I think a key thing that you should remember here is that very often when we are judging the standard of living in an economy, not only do we look at how much money is earned per person in that economy, also it's very often the case that we look at other issues, particularly if you take this through to A level, where we'd then look at things like education, access to healthcare, and of course life expectancy is also a measure of a standard of living. So in terms of standards of living, we would say that in Benin certainly, in Benin the standard of living is actually a lot worse. Right, let's now move on then to the main exports. Now I think here you need to be aware of the difference between the primary sector, the secondary sector and the tertiary sector. So the primary sector, the proper definition of it is that the primary sector comprises of goods which come from the gifts of nature. So from the Earth's surface, from beneath the Earth's surface and from the oceans. That's like farming, mining, fishing. The secondary sector is then sort of processing those basic raw materials. So that would be your manufacturing, and then the tertiary sector is the selling on of those in the service sector. So obviously we can see here that really the developed economy, the United Kingdom, has the specialism in the secondary and tertiary sectors, so the more advanced sectors, and the other countries tend to focus on and have their what's known as their comparative advantage in the primary sector. And then moving on to the last one, national income per capita. So, very important that you know how to calculate national income per capita. So it's the total GDP of the country divided by the number of people in the country. So, looking across the data here, it's very obvious, and as one would anticipate, the United Kingdom, $37,780 per person. That was in 2011, obviously, given the data set. And the country which is the least well off in terms of standard of living here is, of course, Bangladesh, 780. Now this is an interesting one. So we've already mentioned the fact that In Benin, they have the sort of the worst standard of living in terms of life expectancy, yet they have a little bit more money than their counterparts in Bangladesh, who are slightly worse off financially. So it's an interesting point. You may get asked something along the lines of which country has the worst standard of living, and you may wish to say, well, on the one hand it might be Benin because of the life expectancy, but on the other hand, in terms of their ability to purchase goods and services using the dollar measure, it would be Bangladesh. Also, I think it's important to bear in mind the weaknesses associated with GDP per capita figures. So for example, let's say you've got 5 people in an economy and 4 of them are contributing, let's just say $2 to that economy. 4 times 2 is 8. And then you've got another big cheese, a 5th person, and they are contributing $92. So the total GDP of that economy would be 100. Well, if you then calculated the GDP per person, so take that 100 and divide it by the 5 people in the economy, then obviously on an average measure, every person would have $20 per person, because that's the GDP per capita. But obviously, the GDP per capita figure does not tell us about the way in which that income is spread amongst the population. And that's a big weakness with looking at GDP per capita figures. So I think that's probably all to say on that one. So let's move on now to figure 8. Okay, so we're into figure 8, and then we're into this whole issue of poverty in the developing world and in developing nations. So it says here, many countries continue to enjoy the benefits of increased trade, but there are still obstacles which prevent developing countries from achieving the full benefits of increased trade. Free trade, of course, is said to increase a nation's standard of living. So removing tariffs, removing quotas, etc., for most countries is always expected to to increase the standard of living in an economy. And I think I mentioned that in the previous video. A number of developing economies have high levels of poverty, and there is no guarantee that trade can solve these problems. The following information is about Nigeria, which has enjoyed strong growth, but at the same time has millions of people classed as living in poverty. Now, on that table, figure 7, I've mentioned to you about data sets and providing you with data in different units and so on. Again, here, it's difficult to see what you would really be asked about this, apart from the examiner might ask you to describe that data set. So what's happened from the start period to the end period, and you may be asked or expected in your answer to include a reference, for example, to a percentage change from 1980 to 2010. So just make sure that you're able to work out such a percentage change. So if it goes from 1980, we've got 17.1 million, then to 2010 we've got 112 million. Make sure that you are able to calculate that as a percentage change, or from 2004 to 2010, a percentage change. Whatever it may be, make sure that you're able to work out a percentage change. That's the key thing, really. So if you were going from 1980 to 2010, so you'd have to work out the difference between 17.1 million and 112.4 million, and then whatever that number is, put that over, so divide it by 17.1 million and times by 100 to get your percentage change. Obviously it depends the way you're taught to calculate your percentage changes, but that's one way of doing it. Okay, so let's move on. So the next figure 9 follows on from that. Again, it's about Nigeria, and maybe your teachers have got you some press releases on Nigeria, but you should be aware that in Nigeria it's very rich in natural resource in terms of oil, and one would therefore not expect to see the data presented in figure 8, where the numbers of people are living in poverty continue to grow. Poverty has risen in Nigeria despite growth. In 2010, 60.9% of Nigerians were living in absolute poverty. Okay, absolute poverty, key thing here, make sure that you know the difference between absolute and relative poverty. Absolute poverty definitions depend on the book that you're using. Sometimes absolute poverty is referred to as people living on less than $1 a day. Sometimes those living on less than $1.25 a day. Whatever the measure, it ain't very much. Relative poverty means that you're able to get by from day to day and you can at least provide the bare essentials. Food, heat, light, shelter, all of those types of things. So we read in the I read in the paper this morning, for example, David Cameron, now that he's got the very strong government in place, he now going to intend to bring down the amount that people can claim on welfare from a maximum of 26,000 to a maximum of 23,000. Well, that minimum number is said to be equivalent to relative poverty, and if you're a family living on that, then you could afford to buy the essentials but maybe not live a luxurious lifestyle. Anyway, I digress. Nigeria is Africa's biggest oil producer, but the sector has been linked to accusations of corruption. Yes, FIFA, take note. So accusations of corruption. This is a very important point, and this is, it relates to the data set above. So we've got an oil-rich country, yet the numbers of people living in poverty clearly going up. And clearly the rewards and the revenue streams from that oil is maybe in the hands of a few and not trickling down to the hands of the many. Oil accounts for 80% of Nigeria's state revenues, but Nigeria has hardly any capacity to refine crude oil into fuel. The crude oil has to be exported for refining and then imported back into Nigeria as fuel. And that does seem daft, doesn't it? So oil accounts for 80% of the state's revenues. So they really do have all their eggs in one basket in that respect. And obviously, I'm sure you'll be aware of the slide in the oil price in this last year or so, certainly 9 months or so, and that will obviously have hit those revenues very significantly. And if you've nothing else to fall back on, then that really does put your economy into diffs. And the having to export it and then import it back again does suggest that there is a potential there to maybe develop some sort of refinery so that they don't have to do that. I mean, it's the same in the UK. All these cars that come out of Nissan are often exported and then we import them back in again. It is bonkers what goes on in the economy sometimes. I'm sure if I was running the global economy I'd do a much better job. Anyway, that's figure 9. Let's move on. Figure 10. Right, okay, figures 10 and 11. Now, figures 10 and 11 I would take together because they sort of introduce the main final theme here, which is all about aid, foreign aid, or aid for trade. So I'm sure in your classes at school you'll have been made aware of all of the reasons for foreign aid. I read obviously in the paper in this last week or so. It's great to have time off to be able to read the papers from start to finish. But our foreign aid bill continues to get bigger and bigger. Something like, I think it went from 9 billion to 11 or 12 billion in this last year or so. So we're certainly, although we're living in times of austerity, we're certainly doing our fair share to help our others less fortunate than ourselves, which of course is a good thing. I'm not knocking that at all. Anyway, aid for trade. Foreign aid given by the developed world generally to the developing world, and supposed to enable them and facilitate them as they try and grow their economies and really just pull themselves up by the bootstraps out of the very difficult and slow growth economies that they have. Now, some people would argue, of course, that aid doesn't get where it's supposed to. It tends to be siphoned off, and a lot of corruption takes place, and people clamoring for aid because they know that actually they will get the proceeds of aid and it won't actually go to where it's supposed to go. So there's all sorts of things that you can be aware of there. Aid for trade, the argument is that whilst it's all very well donating billions of pounds to these developing nations, they need to be given the facility to get their goods to market and then trade. So it's all very well building a factory in Benin, for example, but when they don't have any roads and they don't have the proper infrastructure to get their goods to market, there is a limit to what that foreign aid will actually do and how beneficial it would be. And so aid for trade really is about establishing the wherewithal and giving these economies the wherewithal so that they can actually physically engage in the trade. Now, if you consult your textbook, at the I think it's sort of the last two, I don't have the book to hand at the moment, but I think it's the last 2 or 3 pages. I would also make yourselves aware with non-governmental organisations such as Oxfam and so on, and the work that they do and whether or not that is beneficial. Also make yourselves aware with, for example, fair trade, and there's a lot of press articles at the moment with regard to the fact that people are buying less and less fair trade nowadays for a number of reasons. But if you do a little bit of research on that, you'll be able to pull that up, no problem at all. So that's the aid for trade, both of those really. And then let's move on. So now we're presented with a final data set here, and again I think it's important to stress, I know I go on about this a lot, but any simple questions directed to you, intended to maybe trick you, you'll lose some easy marks when there's no need to. So again, the units are important here. So this is in billions. Bangladesh, its GDP 115 billion, Costa Rica 45 billion, Ghana 40 billion. Obviously the ones to look out for are Australia 1,520 billion, so 1.5 trillion US dollars. France 2,612 billion, 2.6 trillion US dollars. Germany, Europe's largest economy, 3,399 billion US dollars, or 3.3 trillion. So just be aware of the numbers, ladies and gentlemen, is all I'm saying. Now, this is an interesting data set in that it gives the GDP growth for 2011 and then tells you what percentage of that growth was accounted for by exports. So really, how reliant are these economies on trade for growth? So if you look down the middle column, so it's the GDP growth one, first of all, in order, largest to smallest, we've got Ghana first with 7.9% growth. Then we have Bangladesh 6.3%. Then we have Costa Rica 5.1%, Australia, India, etc. Now if you take those top three, Ghana, what proportion of that growth was accounted for by its exports? 46%, pretty substantial. Bangladesh, 25%. Costa Rica, 38%. So knocking on the door of 2/5, basically. So it is interesting that these developing nations are quite heavily reliant upon the exports for growth. I'm not sure if you're aware of the aggregate demand equation, C plus I plus G plus X minus M, so it's consumption plus investment plus government spending plus X minus M, so it's net exports. And it's interesting that for a country like Ghana, 46% of its growth is coming from the exports of its goods and services. Now, I think you then have to question, well, who will they be exporting to? They'll probably be exporting to the developed world. In some respects that's good, but in others it's not, because, you know, let's look at the growth numbers for the developed world. Australia 3.4%, good, obviously. France 0%, not good. Germany 0.7%, not good. The UK 0.3%, not good. And just on that point, actually, we're waiting. They'll be out today, obviously, 9:30 this morning. The quarterly growth figures for the UK were out. I think it's going to be 0.4% possibly, which is okay-ish. Anyway, I digress. So, if these countries are relying on growth in the developed world, because they can then sell their exports to the developed world, they're going to be in a little bit of difficulty at the moment because the developed world is not growing. And I think then that follows nicely into this final figure 13. The first line here: in today's climate of weak economic recovery and high unemployment, what can governments do to boost growth and employment? One answer lies in keeping global markets open to trade. Trade plays a pivotal role in boosting growth. Trade affects employment in many ways, etc., etc. I think the last paragraph is telling here. Case studies reviewing the experience of the 12 most rapidly growing countries concluded that the power of the global economy was a central feature to all 12 countries. So in other words, if world output is strong, then countries around the globe will all grow quickly. I mean, that just makes sense. Other case studies suggest that the evidence is overwhelming that trade plays an essential role in raising incomes. Obviously that would be free trade, so without tariffs, without quotas, all of the things which are mentioned earlier in this particular specimen material. So as a final point, you want to be anticipating a big final discussion question at the end of your A593 paper, probably focusing around trade, growth and jobs, as mentioned on the last extract here, and whether or not free trade is going to lead to growth and jobs predominantly. Or you might get a discussion question, discussion question about whether or not trade is better than aid for the developing world, and which is more likely to lead them to grow quickly in the future. So do anticipate a question on that. Anyway, that's us finished on this particular specimen material. So I hope you're all revising hard and your revision's going well, and I'll see you again for another edition of G-Economics in the future. So goodbye and good luck with your revision.